everybody! So, I've been meaning to write a blog post about going to the Popular Culture Association American Culture Association conference this year in New Orleans, but I have been crazy busy. I've been writing a book chapter for an anthology. I've been wrapping up teaching for the semester. I was a communications specialist at the Northwest Arkansas Startup Weekend. So things have just been insane around here. So I thought instead of writing a blog post, I'd make a video. A vlog. That is what's happening right now. A vlog. I wanted to do a couple of things. First, I wanted to talk about my experience at PCA ACA, since this was my very first time going to the national conference. And then I wanted to give you some tips about navigating PCA ACA next year when it's in Seattle, Washington. Anyway, this was my very first time at any national conference, and it was my very first time at PCA ACA. And let me tell you, I loved it. I loved it with my whole heart. Essentially, PCA ACA is just Comic-Con for academics. When I showed up, I didn't really anticipate how big the conference was going to be, but it was huge. Like, it was ginormous. So to put that in perspective for you, I saved my conference program. This is my collection of Victorian love stories. And when you put them side by side, you can see that the PCA ACA program is almost putting it to shame. When I picked up my program, I was shocked and slightly overwhelmed, but really excited to hear such amazing papers. I listened to talks about horror film. I listened to talks about the environment. I listened to talks about the apocalypse. I listened to regular literature presentations, I listened to pop culture presentations, and by the time I left, I was so excited to get back to work on my own projects. So I was at PCA ACA to present my paper on Pixar and the American West, but I was on a panel of rock stars. There was Andrew Patrick Nelson, who was our panel moderator, and also has written just tons about the American West. Cordelia Barrera presented on Breaking Bad, and she's from Texas Tech. And then Neeraj Prakash talked about the Australian outback and the myth of the American West. So they were wonderful. They were so smart. I was so nervous presenting with these, really talented academics. But it went really well, and the question and answer session went pretty well too. I enjoyed my talk, and I enjoyed talking to everyone there. So major props to Helen Lewis, who was the Western Area Chair this year, and just made it a wonderful experience. During the weekend, there were wonderful papers. I mean, like with any conference, you go to some panels that are really good, and then you go to some panels that are like, okay. But most of these panels were just wonderful. So I thought I would give a shout out to some of the papers that I really super enjoyed. Nancy Romig presented a paper on E.L. Doctorow, which I really loved. Michelle Hansen gave a talk about how Disney World is basically a horror show, which was kind of mind-blowing to me. It's supposed to be the happiest place on earth, but she talked about how it's also really uncanny and can be kind of uncomfortable too. Holly Clay Buck talked about using graphic novels and comics to teach Composition 1 and different writing strategies. And then I went to a panel about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and every single paper on that panel was just knockout wonderful. Sarah Grakowski talked about the female gaze and male objectification, and she also talked about how people don't believe that the female gaze exists, which, hello, I have eyeballs. Clearly it's here. Thomas Parham's paper was about Marvel movies versus the DC movies, and spoiler alert, Marvel movies 2 thumbs up. I mean, all of the papers that I listened to were really good, but the comics panels really blew it out of the water. And of course the Western panels did too. So basically, I had an amazing time. I had my head crammed full of new knowledge, which is obviously one thing I super enjoy, and I left inspired to do more work and basically inspired to indulge in pop culture, which, let's be honest, I am already doing. Did you binge watch Daredevil? Because I've been binge watching Daredevil, and let me tell you, blindness has never been sexier. Although I enjoyed PCA, ACA a lot, I was kind of unprepared going in. So I thought I would give you some tips for surviving the next PCA, ACA intact. Tip number 1, don't read your paper. I am guilty of this. I read my paper word for word, and obviously that's normal for academic conferences. But my favorite papers that I listened to had people who were talking off the cuff, and they knew their stuff, and nobody accused them of not applying the right literary theory to their paper. Like, all of the questions were content oriented. So if I were to go back and do it again, I would definitely just talk to my audience. Tip number 2, take good notes and talk to people. I scribbled notes like a crazy person, but the most insightful thing I did was talk to people after they delivered their paper. So of course there's like the question and answer session where you're like pit sweating because you're afraid that somebody's going to ask you something you can't answer. And there a lot of times are the answers that you practiced. But having a conversation with someone gives you a lot more insight. Tip number 3, wear comfy shoes. I walked everywhere, and let me tell you, my dogs were killing me. 4, plan your talk in advance, but don't overplan your conference. So I sat through one presentation that shall not be named, where a presenter went on for 30 minutes. Huge party foul. So make sure that you practice your paper delivery in advance. Having said that, it's better to play the conference off the cuff. Take a little bit, look through your program, pick panels that are interesting to you, and make sure to go to them. Also, move out of your comfort zone. So I went to some panels on horror film, which, let me tell you, I cried through Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So like, horror film, not for me. But I learned a lot of interesting things about horror film. And pro tip 5, tweet like a fiend. I really liked following the hashtag on Twitter. As a matter of fact, I went to the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe panel, because people were tweeting about it like crazy. So I left my panel and went to that one and had a fantastic time. I actually wish more people had tweeted at PCA, ACA. Like, I was able to engage in some really great scholarly conversations with people on Twitter, but there weren't as many people tweeting as I would have thought for a popular culture association conference. Use Twitter. Be polite about it. But it does help those of us who are plugged into social networks to know what you're learning about. And also, it helps us be in 2 places at one time. That was my experience at PCA, ACA. And those are my tips for getting the most out of your conference, right? So if you have any suggestions, you can leave them in the comments. Or better yet, you can visit my blog at ashley.thelong19th.com and leave comments there too. Thank you to the Popular Culture Association, American Culture Association, for putting on such a wonderful conference, and I hope to see you guys there next year. Bye!